On Tuesday, April 14th, the decree of the Court of Session in the schoolmaster's cause was reversed in the House of Lords, after a very eloquent speech by Lord Mansfield, who showed himself an adept in school discipline, but I thought was too rigorous towards my client. On the evening of the next day, I supped with Dr. Johnson at the Crown and Anchor Tavern in the Strand in company with Mr. Langton and his brother-in-law, Lord Binning. I repeated a sentence of Lord Mansfield's speech, of which, by the aid of Mr. Longlands, the solicitor on the other side, who obligingly allowed me to compare his notes with my own, I have a full copy. My lords, severity is not the way to govern either boys or men. Nay, said Johnson, it is the way to govern them. I know not whether it be the way to mend them. I talked of the recent expulsion of 6 students from the University of Oxford who were Methodists and would not desist from publicly praying and exhorting. Johnson said, Sir, that expulsion was extremely just and proper. What have they to do at a university who are not willing to be taught, but will presume to teach? Where is religion to be learnt but at an university? Sir, they were examined and found to be mighty ignorant fellows. I said, But was it not hard, sir, to expel them, for I am told they were good beings? Johnson said, Sir, I believe they might be good beings, but they were not fit to be in the University of Oxford. A cow is a very good animal in the field, but we turn her out of a garden. Lord Ellenbach used to repeat this as an illustration and commonly happy. Desirous of calling Johnson forth to talk and exercise his wit, though I should myself be the object of it, I resolutely ventured to undertake the defence of convivial indulgence in wine, though he was not tonight in the most genial humour. After urging the common plausible topics, I at last had recourse to the maxim in vino veritas. A man who is well warmed with wine will speak truth. Johnson said, Why, sir, that may be an argument for drinking if you suppose men in general to be liars. But, sir, I would not keep company with a fellow who lies as long as he is sober, and whom you must make drunk before you can get a word of truth out of him. Mr. Langton told us he was about to establish a school upon his estate, but it had been suggested to him that it might have a tendency to make the people less industrious. Johnson said, No, sir. While learning to read and write is a distinction, the few who have that distinction may be the less inclined to work. But when everybody learns to read and write, it is no longer a distinction. A man who has a laced waistcoat is too fine a man to work. But if everybody had laced waistcoats, we should have people working in laced waistcoats. There are no people whatever more industrious, none who work more, than our manufacturers. Yet they have all learned to read and write. Sir, you must not neglect doing a thing immediately good from fear of remote evil, from fear of it being abused. That's good advice. A man who has candles may sit up too late, which he would not do if he had not candles. But nobody will deny that the art of making candles, by which light is continued to us beyond the time that the sun gives us light, is a valuable art and ought to be preserved. I said, But, sir, would it not be better to follow nature and go to bed and rise just as nature gives us light or withholds it? Johnson said, No, sir, for then we should have no kind of equality in the partition of our time between sleeping and waking. It would be very different in different seasons and in different places. In some of the northern parts of Scotland, how little light is there in the depth of winter? We talked of Tacitus, and I hazard an opinion that with all his merit for penetration, shrewdness of judgment, In terseness of expression, he was too compact, too much broken into hints, as it were, and therefore too difficult to be understood. To my great satisfaction, Dr. Johnson sanctioned this opinion. Tacitus, sir, seems to me rather to have made notes from an historical work than to have written a history, said Johnson. It is remarkable that Lord Mondapo, whom, on account of his resembling Dr. Johnson in some particulars, Foote called an Elzevir edition of him, has, by coincidence, made the very same remark in Origin and Progress of Language, Volume 3. So he ripped him off, I guess. At this time, it appears from his prayers and meditations that Johnson had been more than commonly diligent in religious duties, particularly in reading the Holy Scriptures. It was Passion Week, that solemn season which the Christian world has appropriated to the commemoration of the mysteries of our redemption, and during which whatever embers of religion are in our breasts will be kindled into pious warmth. I paid him a short visit both on Friday and Saturday, and seeing his large folio Greek treatment before him, beheld him with a reverential awe, and would not intrude upon his time. While he was thus employed to such good purpose, and while his friends, in their intercourse with him, constantly found a vigorous intellect and a lively imagination, it is melancholy to read in his private register, quote, "My mind is unsettled and my memory confused. I have late turned my thoughts with a very useless earnestness upon past incidents. I have yet got no command upon my thoughts. An unpleasing incident is almost certain to hinder my rest." What philosophic heroism was it in him to appear with such manly fortitude to the world while he was inwardly so distressed? We must surely believe that the mysterious principle of being made perfect through suffering was to be strongly exemplified in Johnson. On Sunday, April 19th, being Easter Day, General Paoli and I paid him a visit before dinner. We talked of the notion that blind persons can distinguish color by the touch. Johnson said that Professor Sanderson mentioned his having attempted to do it, but that he found he was aiming at an impossibility, that to be sure a difference in the surface makes the difference of colors, but the difference is so fine that it is not sensible to the touch. The general mentioned jugglers and fraudulent gamesters who could know cards by the touch. Dr. Johnson said, "The cards used by such persons must be less polished than ours commonly are." We talked of sounds. The general said there was no beauty in a simple sound, but only in a harmonious composition of sounds. No fan of John Cage, I guess. I presume to differ from this opinion, and mention the soft and sweet sound of a fine woman's voice. Johnson said, "No, sir, if a serpent or a toad uttered it, you would think it ugly." I said, "So you would think, sir, were a beautiful tune to be uttered by one of those animals." Johnson said, "No, sir, it would be admired. We have seen fine fiddlers whom we liked as little as toads." And then he laughed. Talking of the subject of taste in the arts, he said that difference of taste was, in truth, difference of skill. I said, "But, sir, is there not a quality called taste which consists merely in perception or in liking? For instance, we find people differ much as to what is the best style of English composition. Some think Swift's the best, others prefer a fuller and grander way of writing." Johnson said, "Sir, you must first define what you mean by style before you can judge who has a good taste in style and who has a bad. The two classes of person whom you have mentioned don't differ as to good and bad. They both agree that Swift has a good neat style, but one loves a neat style, another loves a style of more splendor. In like manner, one loves a plain coat, another loves a laced coat, but neither will deny that each is good in its kind." While I remained in London this spring, I was with him at several other times, both by himself and in company. I dined with him one day at the Crown and Anchor Tavern in the Strand, with Lord Ellenbeck, Mr. Langton, and Dr. Vansittart of Oxford. Without specifying each particular day, I have preserved the following memorable things. I regretted the reflection in his preface to Shakespeare against Garrick, to whom we cannot but apply the following passage. Quote, I collated such copies as I could procure and wished for more, but have not found the collectors of these rarities very communicative. I told Johnson that Garrick had complained to me of it, and had vindicated himself by assuring me that Johnson was made welcome to the full use of his collection, and that he left the key of it with a servant, with orders to have a fire and every convenience for him. I found Johnson's notion was that Garrick wanted to be courted for them, and that, on the contrary, Garrick should have courted him, and sent him the plays of his own accord. But indeed, considering the slovenly and careless manner in which books were treated by Johnson, now look at mine, it would not be expected that scarce and valuable editions should have been left to him. Fair enough. A gentleman, a later footnote tells us this gentleman is actually Boswell, having to some of the usual arguments for drinking, added this. You know, sir, drinking drives away care and makes us forget whatever is disagreeable. Would not you allow a man to drink for that reason? Johnson answered, Yes, sir, if he sat next to you. I expressed a liking for Mr. Francis Osborne's works, and asked him what he thought of that writer. Johnson answered, A conceited fellow. Were a man to write so now, the boys would throw stones at him. He, however, did not alter my opinion of a favorite author to whom I was first directed by his being quoted in The Spectator, all in whom I have found much shown and lively sense, expressed indeed in a style somewhat quaint, which, however, I do not dislike. His book has an air of originality. We figure to ourselves an ancient gentleman's talking to us. When one of Johnson's friends, another footnote here says, perhaps Boswell again, endeavored to maintain that a country gentleman might contrive to pass his life very agreeably, Sir, said Johnson, you cannot give me an instance of any man who is permitted to lay out his own time contriving not to have tedious hours. I can agree with that. This observation, however, is equally applicable to gentlemen who live in cities and are of no profession. Johnson also said, there is no permanent national character. It varies according to circumstances. Alexander the Great swept India. Now the Kirks sweep Greece. A learned gentleman, later footnote tells us this is Dr. Robert Vansittart, who in the court of conversation wished to inform us of the simple fact that the council upon this circuit of Shrewsbury was much bitten by fleas, took, I suppose, 7 or 8 minutes in relating it circumstantially. He in a plenitude of phrases told us that large bales of woolen cloth were lodged in the town hall, that by reason of this fleas nestled there in prodigious numbers, that the lodgings of the council were near to the town hall, and that those little animals moved from place to place with wonderful agility. Johnson sat in great impatience till the gentleman had finished his tedious narrative, and then burst out, playfully, however, It is a pity, sir, that you have not seen a lion, for a flea has taken you such a time that a lion must have served you a 12-month. Mrs. Piozzi, to whom I told this anecdote, has related it as if the gentleman had given the natural history of the mouse. Johnson would not allow Scotland to derive any credit from Lord Mansfield, for he was educated in England. Much, said he, may be said of a Scotsman, if he be caught young. Talking of a modern historian and a modern moralist, later footnote tells us this is Robertson and Beattie. Johnson said, "There is more thought in the moralist than in the historian. There is but a shallow stream of thought in history." I said, "But surely, sir, an historian has reflection." Johnson said, "Why, yes, sir, but so has a cat who, when she catches a mouse for her kitten. But she cannot write like blank, and neither can blank." I believe those blanks were Robertson and Beatty. Johnson said, "I am very unwilling to read this manuscript of authors and give them my opinion. If the authors who apply to me have money, I bid them boldly print without a name. If they have written in order to get money, I tell them to go to the booksellers and make the best bargain they can." I said, "But, sir, if a bookseller should bring you a manuscript to look at?" Johnson said, "Why, sir, I would desire the bookseller to take it away." I mentioned a friend of mine, later footnote tells us this friend is actually his brother David, who had resided long in Spain and was unwilling to return to Britain. Johnson said, "Sir, he is attached to some woman." I said, "I rather believe, sir, it is the fine climate which keeps him there." Johnson said, "Nay, sir, how can you talk so? What is climate to happiness? Place me in the heart of Asia, should I not be exiled? What proportion does climate bear to the complex system of human life? You may advise me to go to live in Bologna to eat sausages. The sausages there are the best in the world. They lose much by being carried." Okay. On Saturday, May 9th, Mr. Dempster and I had agreed to dine by ourselves at the British Coffee House. Johnson, on whom I happened to call in the morning, said he would join us, which he did, and we spent a very agreeable day, though I recollect but little of what passed. Johnson said, "Walpole was a minister given by the king to the people. Pitt was a minister given to the people by the king, as an adjunct." He also said, "The misfortune of Goldsmith in conversation is this: he goes on without knowing how he is to get off. His genius is great, but his knowledge is small. As they say of a generous man, it is a pity he is not rich. We may say of Goldsmith that it is a pity he is not knowing. He would not keep his knowledge to himself." Before leaving London this year, I consulted Johnson upon a question purely of Scotch law. It was held of old, and continued for a long period, to be an established principle in that law that whoever intermeddled with the effects of a person deceased, without the interposition of legal authority to guard against embezzlement, should be subjected to pay all the debts of the deceased, as having been guilty of what was technically called vicious intromission. The Court of Session had gradually relaxed the strictness of this principle, where the interference proved and been inconsiderable. In a case, Wilson against Smith and Armour, which came before the court that preceding winter, I had labored to persuade the judges to return to the ancient law. It was my own sincere opinion that they ought to adhere to it, but I had exhausted all my powers of reasoning in vain. Johnson thought as I did, and in order to assist me in my application to the court for a revision and alteration of the judgment, he dictated to me the following argument. Oh boy, how long is this? I'm not going to read that argument. We'll take that up tomorrow, because it's a couple pages long, I think. Yes, indeed. Yeah, it's like 4 pages long. Okay, well, until next time, bye from Boswell.